Imagine a world just recovering from the apocalypse. A few million years after the colossal asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, a new kind of giant began to stalk the land. But this wasn't a reptile, it was a bird. In the lush, humid rainforests that covered what is now Wyoming, you wouldn't hear the flutter of wings, but the heavy, thudding footsteps of a true titan, Diatrima. Picture this. A bird standing over 6 feet tall, a feathered giant built not for the skies, but for pure terrestrial power. This wasn't your average garden bird. Diatrima was a powerhouse, a creature that commanded its environment during the late Paleocene and early Eocene epochs, a time when mammals were still finding their footing, most of them no bigger than a house cat. So what exactly was this incredible creature? Believe it or not, paleontologists believe Diatrima is related to modern-day ducks and geese. It's hard to imagine your friendly park duck evolving from something so massive, but that's the magic of evolution. Instead of webbed feet for paddling, Diatrima had powerful, muscular legs designed for running, carrying its bulky frame through the dense undergrowth of the ancient forest. Let's break down its anatomy, because that's where the real story is. Its legs were thick and strong, ending in feet that were just as remarkable. They sported blunt, almost hoof-like claws. These weren't the sharp talons of a hawk designed for grasping prey. These were built for traction and stability, like the feet of a modern ostrich or emu, suggesting a life spent firmly on the ground, covering large distances in search of food. And speaking of food, the most iconic feature of Diatrima was its head. It was enormous, disproportionately large for its body, and armed with a beak that was an absolute marvel of natural engineering. This wasn't a delicate, pointed beak for sipping nectar. It was a massive, powerful, hatchet-like instrument. For a long time, this formidable beak led scientists to a dramatic conclusion. Diatrima must have been a fearsome apex predator. The theory was captivating. Imagine this giant bird, a terror bird of the north, using its immense beak to strike down the small, early mammals that shared its forest home. It was a compelling narrative, a bird stepping into the vacant role of top carnivore left behind by the dinosaurs. For decades, this image of Diatrima as a vicious killer dominated museum displays and documentaries. It was easy to see why. That beak looked like it could crush bone with ease. The sheer size and power of the animal made it a perfect candidate for the role of a prehistoric monster. However, science is a journey of constant discovery and revision. As new evidence emerged, the portrait of Diatrima began to change. A closer look at that incredible beak revealed something interesting. While immensely powerful, it may not have been perfectly designed for tearing flesh. The structure seemed better suited for applying immense crushing force, a vertical vice-like pressure. Then came the footprints. Fossilized trackways attributed to Diatrima were discovered, and they told a fascinating story. The tracks showed no evidence of a sharp, recurved killing talon, a feature often seen in predatory birds like eagles. The impressions were of those blunt, hoof-like claws we mentioned earlier, claws that are not ideal for pinning down struggling prey. The final piece of the puzzle came from a detailed chemical analysis of Diatrima's fossilized bones. By studying the isotopes within the bone material, scientists can get a surprisingly clear picture of an animal's diet. The results were startling. The chemical signatures found in Diatrima's bones were not consistent with a diet of meat. Instead, they strongly pointed towards a diet of plants. Suddenly, the terror bird narrative collapsed. Diatrima wasn't a vicious killer after all. It was a giant herbivore, a peaceful giant roaming the forest floor. That powerful hatchet-like beak wasn't for crushing the skulls of mammals, but for something else entirely. The leading theory now is that Diatrima was a specialized nut-eater or a frugivore. Its mighty beak was a giant nutcracker. Think about the environment it lived in. These early Cenozoic rainforests would have been filled with plants producing large, tough-shelled nuts and seeds packed with energy. For an animal this big, being able to access a food source that smaller creatures couldn't would be a huge advantage. Diatryma could have used its beak to crack open the toughest nuts with a single, powerful clamp, getting to the nutritious kernel inside. It might have also used it to shear through tough plant matter, roots and hard fruits. So let's repaint our picture of this magnificent bird. Instead of a bloodthirsty predator, we see a 6-foot-tall, flightless goose relative peacefully foraging through the ferns and cycads of a Wyoming rainforest. We hear the loud crack as its powerful beak splits open a large prehistoric nut. It uses its strong legs to travel between groves of fruit-bearing trees, its heavy footfalls a familiar rhythm in the forest. This revised identity doesn't make Diatryma any less impressive. In fact, it makes it even more interesting. It shows us a unique evolutionary path, a bird that became a giant not to hunt, but to exploit a specialized plant-based diet. It filled a niche similar to some of the large ground-dwelling mammals that would evolve millions of years later. Diatryma's reign lasted through the late Paleocene and into the early Eocene, a period of several million years. But like all great prehistoric beasts, its time eventually came to an end. The world was changing. As the Eocene progressed, the climate began to cool and dry out. The lush rainforests that Diatryma depended on started to shrink, giving way to more open woodlands and grasslands. At the same time, mammals were continuing their incredible evolutionary radiation. They were getting bigger, more diverse, and more competitive. New types of mammalian herbivores were emerging, better adapted to the changing vegetation, and new mammalian predators were appearing too, which may have preyed on Diatryma's young or eggs. Faced with a changing environment, a dwindling food supply, and increasing competition, the great flightless nutcracker bird eventually disappeared from the fossil record. It was an evolutionary experiment that, while successful for millions of years, ultimately couldn't adapt to a new world. The story of Diatryma is a perfect example of how science works. It's a tale that has shifted from a fearsome monster to a peaceful giant, all based on new discoveries and a willingness to question old assumptions. It reminds us that the past is a puzzle, and with each new fossil, each new analysis, we get a clearer and often more surprising picture of the incredible life that once walked the earth. So the next time you see a goose or a duck, take a moment to remember their truly gigantic nut-cracking ancestor that once roamed the ancient forests of North America. It's a powerful reminder that even the most familiar animals have an epic and surprising history.